I agree. That's what I would have said, actually. So I defer to my colleagues. The only thing I might add is that it's very important the degree to which the public support or do not support the Taliban. And I think, again, I defer to you, Ahmad, but my impression is that they support the Taliban much less than they would have some 5 or 7 years ago.
Fully agree with you. I don't think there is vast support within the Taliban, for the Taliban within the vast population, but in significant pockets because of various different reasons, because of various reservations, some people are receptive to that. And it's not really because they want the Taliban to come back, but it's because of fear, intimidation, on various different levels. They have really brutalized and still use draconian measures on various of these tribal elders. If you look at various different areas, I mean, they have just taken out lots of tribal and religious elders, and that have installed fear in the heart of the population. And one of the reasons why I think there isn't a great demand, particularly in the Taliban, for the Taliban at this stage, is that a lot of people know what they were responsible for in the 90s. If they were a group that has just started, I think there would be much more support for them as compared to, the memories that still remain.
Can we have more questions? We have a gentleman here. Could you please stand up and introduce yourself? And then we come to Juan Ko.
Thank you very much. I'm Siraj Chowdhury from the United Nations. My question is directed to Mr. Karzai. As you have already mentioned that military solution is not the answer, political solution is the answer. Under that perspective, I would like to ask you, under conflict resolutions and political settlement, there is also a program called nonviolence. The nonviolent philosophy of Gandhi brought independence in India, and the nonviolence policy of Martin Luther King brought a great change of the civil rights movement in this country too. So I'm just wondering whether there is any political leader in future might evolve from this situation's catastrophic situation to pursue the policy and philosophy of the nonviolent movement in Afghanistan, and then that will bring a lot of changes, and whether there could be a role of Muslim community from Europe and America to join in this nonviolent movement in Afghanistan, and so that American occupation ends and American resources you can use for the development of your institution and country development program. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And then we have Juan Ko here.
Actually, my question follows very much on the previous one. I think there's an analytical difference between terrorism as a tactic of an insurgency or a national liberation movement and terrorism as a tactic of civilian groups in a democracy. And with regard to a place like Britain, where the Muslim community is, from all accounts, opinion polls and so forth, extremely alienated from the British establishment, from British foreign policy, from the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, and so forth. It just seems to me that there has to be a space for legitimate dissent, for community activism to try to influence foreign policy and so forth, and that maybe one of the ways forward is to have imams and community activists trained political canvassing in nonviolent protest and so forth, but that is to say, to recognize the legitimacy of the frustrations, but then to channel them in democratic directions. And it seems to me that we also make a mistake often that increasingly dissent is criminalized. In the aftermath of 9/11, we've seen a lot of peace activists in the United States put on no-fly lists. We've seen protest zones so that the right to peaceful assembly has been curtailed. And it seems to me actually we should be encouraging legitimate dissent and protest.
So let me put that directly to Shiraz. Surely, we must, as democracies, provide opportunities for people to let steam off, no?
Absolutely, and I think the point is people do. And I mean, you only need to look at London whenever there's big international events, the streets are filled with people who are very angry and very frustrated. What worries me is that the people mobilizing these groups, the people who are leading these organizations and demonstrations are doing it very much from a loaded perspective rather than from a neutral perspective. Rather than making demands on the state or requests on the state in your capacity as a citizen, it is essentially your confessional identity that is being put at the heart of that agenda. That's where it becomes problematic, because you are telling Muslims themselves, in this context at least, that the most important aspect of their identity and the most important aspect of themselves, in the public sphere at least, when engaging politically, is their confessional identity. That's what we need to start getting away from. In itself, of course, this is good if people are engaging with the system and are making demands on it as citizens, and so on. It's the increasing injection of confessional identity politics, I think, which is what makes it problematic.
I'm going to take 2 more questions because we have to wrap up pretty much on time, because Zipi Livni is going to come here in 15 minutes. But I had one question in the front row from Trudy Rubin from the Philadelphia News, right? Inquirer. And then I take one more.
I'd like to pick up on this question of tell me how it ends in Afghanistan with Hekmat Karzai and Michael Semple. Do either or both of you think that that Big T Taliban would be willing to negotiate when they think they are winning? And under what conditions could you envision that they would actually accept a constitutional framework and lay down arms, and how could anyone guarantee that they would stick with that?
So, and one last question. I won't take Sebastian there, because there's so many hands, Sebastian, but next time, next conference. There were a number of hands in the back. Yes, lady in blue. Please stand up, because then people with the microphone will see you.
All of you seem to have an agreed...
Could you please tell us who you are?
Naomi Seligman, Ostraka von Simpson.
Thank you.
All of you seem to agree that the most likely outcome in Afghanistan is a political solution and a negotiation with the Taliban. I think this links to the previous question, by the way. The trouble is Big T versus a splintered group, and I heard Professor Cronin speak in terms of you usually have failure when you have a splintered group. Witness the issue in the Middle East today. What is your thinking on Big T versus splintering? Thank you.
Okay, I want to give everyone the chance to respond to all of these questions, or pick some that you fancy answering. I particularly like to ask Hekmat and Michael perhaps to say, why should the Taliban get involved in an accommodation when they seem to be winning? Michael.
The Taliban would love to be in a situation where they could claim credit for the NATO forces having left Afghanistan, even if they had nothing whatsoever to do with the drawdown of NATO troops or the end of the surge. They would love to be able to say that we have established our place in Afghan history because we drove NATO into the sea. If they think that they can ride things out for a year or two to get themselves into that position and then enter the fray of Afghan politics with their guns and their claim to be history makers, and perhaps intimidate everybody else into accepting them as a central government, yeah, that would be a preferred outcome for much of the movement. The question, the point is, do they have a chance of doing that, or can they be persuaded that it simply ain't going to happen? So I think that the most likely time when you see a serious move of Taliban leadership towards political engagement is when they realize that in the long run they are frozen out of power, that they have no options where they can fight their way into Kabul, that they have no options where by force they can establish their dominance over all the other parts of Afghan society that basically don't accept the Taliban as their representatives. So it's something which if they were cute and we were well organized, it could happen very soon, but is rather more likely to happen in 2 or 3 years' time rather than now.